welcome to Pluribus Unum's Fireside Chats. Not as good as 50 yards, but hey, it's something. Now, this episode is going to be like a little bit different from the rest of the episodes in this series. Not different in a bad way. I'd actually argue it might be different in a good way. It might be very good in this way. Because, well, you'll see what it is when I finally get to it. But, also, I don't know if a formal announcement is going to be, released by the time this episode comes out. Maybe it will, maybe it won't. I don't know. But, essentially, at this point, I think it's official that I'm going to be doing a reaction series on my Patreon, where basically people get to request, the patrons will get to request shows or videos or whatever to watch, and then I'll post my reactions over on the Patreon. I've already done 2 thus far. I've done the season finale of a show that I'm going to be making a politics and media on soon, and I've done the episode of the Pokemon anime where Team Rocket returns for the final time. Given that, it can literally be anything. Maybe I might even upload playthrough videos of a video game that I might do on a politics and media at one point. But I will make it very abundantly clear, I am only doing episodes that are requested by my patrons. If you're not paying me, I'm not going to do a request that you ask for. I don't want to see you typing in the comments on this video and saying, "Oh, can you watch this?" No. I won't do it unless you give me money. I'm sorry that I gotta be a little more blunt about this, but, I've tried to do the things that I thought would be fair for the patron. People could still donate, but they might get, a tiny little thing extra. I'm not gonna actually make, a big series on there that'll, actually be, somewhat, interesting content, because I don't want to, divide it up on that point. But it's guys, I'm at the point where I'm literally thinking I'll just post the videos on the Patreon and just leave this channel to die. I ask you all for suggestions on how to make the Patreon fairer and what will incentivize people to join the Patreon, and nobody's biting. I know a lot of you say, I don't have money. I know for a fact that not every single one of you is like that. And I'm not even asking for that much. And here I go. I don't even know if I'm gonna leave this in or not, because it's just this is so e-baggy now. But legitimately, it's been almost 2 years, and I have not cracked double digits on the Patreon. And, nobody in the freaking area I'm in is hiring, apparently. And when I ask for editing work or something else, there's still nothing, crickets. This is literally not sustainable. I'm trying not to be doomer about it, but, guys. Anyways, there's really not much else I could say about that particular subject without getting, incredibly, sad, doomeristic or whatever. So let's get right into the news. The first news story is not necessarily a news story, but is something that happened that is newsworthy. Apparently, and I'm using this one to start out with because of the series that we're doing right now, and the series, pilot show, the one that started it all for the series, Brand New Congress, has officially dissolved. They formally announced today, well, not today, they formally announced a little bit ago that effective immediately they were closing their doors. Now, the writing was kind of on the wall, essentially. They really weren't doing anything at that point. They were silent since the 2022 midterms, and I'm pretty sure what they were doing was that they were trying to build up an idea of maybe doing something further, but I think essentially at that point it was just there was no viability. Brand New Congress was essentially just the shadow group of Justice Democrats. Justice Dems was the one who got basically all of the credit, whereas Brand New Congress essentially didn't, rightfully so, because they were kind of a crappy organization, which you could see if you watch the pilot of this series, my problem with. But there's not much else I can say about that. Farewell, Brand New Congress. We hardly knew ye. Now, speaking of things we hardly knew, Emmanuel Macron. That's actually not true. But I always do these stupid segues. So anyways, for those who don't know and have been keeping up with French news, there was actually this big divide over the pension age in France. And basically, Emmanuel Macron has been trying to raise the retirement age, and a lot of the parliament, which is governed by the far right and far left, both seem to oppose this measure. Allegedly, I think I think it was like the hard right parties were like saying that we shouldn't raise the retirement age because they're right-wing populist. And of course, the left-wing populists, like Jean-Luc Mélenchon, were also against raising the retirement age for very obvious reasons. So what ended up happening was there was a lot of protests because Macron kept trying to push for this bill. And many people thought that these protests were a good sign to show Macron that the public did not want to do this and that maybe Macron would back off. Well, Macron decided to do something interesting. He has decided to override the parliament and use some special constitutional powers to pass the bill regardless. To which basically the entirety of his country and the world is confused and wondering, why the heck is this a thing? Frankly, there is not much else for me to say on that. I have not really been keeping up to date with the French protests and this retirement bill. All I need to know is whatever Jean-Luc Mélenchon says, he is completely right. And speaking of people who are in the right, a interesting figure is doing something interesting. A Nebraska state senator by the name of Machaela Cavanaugh decided to filibuster on the Nebraska legislature floor and offered her support to a liquor taxation bill, but during this, she decided to talk about a unrelated bill regarding gender-affirming care, and she's basically stated that if the legislature collectively decides that legislating hate against children is a priority, then I'm going to make it painful for everyone. I will burn the session to the ground over this bill. And apparently she said that 3 weeks ago, and she's still filibustering that anti-trans bill to this day. Very much interesting, and I'm very excited for this. I support her 100%. I might say, don't you hate the filibuster? Well, yeah, I do. I generally hate the filibuster. But you can use a bad tool to do good things. For example, the police. Overall, objectively, I am anti-police or anti-military. But I can also acknowledge that the military and the police can do some good things. I'm also anti-gun, and I can understand that guns can do good things. I'm also anti-platforming white supremacists, but I can understand that in some very rare cases, platforming a white supremacist can actually lead to a positive good. Sometimes, not all the time. Now, we're going to do something next that I don't think anybody even remembers that I do. Talk about minor parties. Pluribus Unum talking about minor parties? What a shock. And the first minor party I'm going to talk about is actually very interesting. The Constitution Party has essentially declared that they're going to disaffiliate their California state party. And the reason why they're doing it is actually really hilarious. Now, you see, there's technically two reasons why they're doing it. You see, their formal reason for doing it is that they want to get the American Independent Party. For those who don't remember, it's that incredibly formally segregationist political party that basically became a vehicle for the far right in California that a bunch of independents accidentally registered for. They want to get that party as their state affiliate, which they've been trying to do for a while, but they've historically had some issues with. But now they're formally going to try and do this again. But there is somebody who is alleging that there's actually a different reason as to why they don't want this to happen, why they're trying to do this. And that person is the Constitution Party of California's chairman, Don J. Grunman, who has stated that he believes that they're doing this specifically so that they can get rid of him and make him, leave the party. Now, personally, if it's the second reason, I'm 100% on board. Now, I'm sure a lot of you don't know who Don J. Grunman is. So I'm going to let Don J. Grunman's own words do all the talking for him.
When they come, you're going to turn right around and say, well, we deserved it. We haven't done anything. We're a totally peaceful racist group.
Yeah, it's that guy. But he's also done a lot more. As you can tell, he's the chairman of the Constitution Party of California, so he's clearly done more. But the guy has done a lot. Okay, so the next minor party that we're going to talk about is one that is, I guess it is slightly out of date, but it's I can kind of see where things are coming in now. The pieces are starting to fall into place. Okay, so recently, the no-label parties has gotten enough signatures to get on the ballot in North Carolina. And, like, they've gotten enough signatures, but they haven't really officially gotten on the ballot in North Carolina yet because, you know, you have to go through a whole process to get on the ballot in North Carolina. But this is also coming along the lines of something that just happened recently, where Larry Hogan, the leader of the No Labels group, had announced that he is not going to be running a presidential campaign as a Republican, but has held the door open for the potential of running as an independent or a third-party candidate in the general election. And that's when things finally clicked. Like, I was wondering why the No Labels party was, like, getting on the ballot anyways, and I figured it out. Like, basically, Larry Hogan and, like, maybe someone else, maybe it'll just be Larry, or maybe one of the other people who is interested in potentially running for president under, like, the No Labels group, is going to threaten to run as a independent candidate. Like, is going to threaten, they're going to use the No Labels party as a threat come November of 2024, or I think, like, basically Hogan is just trying to make Joe Biden want him, or like a warning to Republicans to not nominate Trump. Much like how Howard Schultz was, like, doing that whole, I might run as an independent if Bernie is the nominee. Like, they're basically keeping the door open because they don't really care whoever actually ends up becoming president because their interests are going to be kept safe. But they can just verbally make the threat. But anyways, not much else for me to say on that. We have to wait until the actual No Labels party actually considers actually running candidates. Speaking of actual candidates, let's move on to the Chicago mayoral race, because things have gotten a little bit heated in the Chicago mayoral race as of recently. Because, as you know, Paul Vallas and Brandon Johnson, the race is a bit close now. Like, I mean, going into the original, like, election, it seemed like very easily, like, Paul was sort of winning, but now things, like, finally the coalitions of the candidates are starting to, like, form. I will say, point blank, I did get one prediction wrong. My prediction originally was that basically all of the opposition candidates would probably back Johnson or not anybody at all. But a lot of candidates have actually been going around backing Paul Vallas. A very interesting move, to say the least. Especially considering one of the candidates in question who has decided to back a candidate. One of the smaller candidates of the race, Jamal Green, has made the stunning decision to endorse Paul Vallas for Chicago mayor. Now, the first initial shock of that is interesting, but I'll explain one reason why it's also shocking. Like, I guess to just spoil a little bit, Brandon Johnson got the endorsement of Bernie, and Jamal Green was a co-chair of the Bernie campaign in Illinois. So the question is, like, why did he go and support Vallas? Apparently, this is what Jamal Green has stated. He has alleged that Brandon Johnson is a fraud, trying to use his family's home in the West Side's crime-ridden Austin community to his advantage. As someone who is trying to portray himself as he's, like, super black and had these experiences, he has been disconnected from the black community the whole time he's been in Chicago for the last 15 years. Since he moved from Elgin, that's why I took that personal. As somebody who is actually from the community, who is experiencing these problems, who is dealing with gun violence and at-risk youth, it is personal to me when people use that suffering and pain and disinvestment for their use when they really haven't experienced it and they really haven't fought to make it better. Now, many people say, that didn't really answer anything. Like, that doesn't answer anything in regards to why you're backing Vallas over Johnson. But he elaborates. He's going to create an office of black Americans to tackle the oppression and redlining that has happened throughout the years. He's going to make sure black contractors get their set asides. He's going to have a youth jobs program year-round. He will put trades back in schools and have apprenticeships, tech hubs for the next generation of jobs, as well as mayoral fellows program for young people to have a pipeline into city government and a re-entry program for the folks who return from prison. This is about an agenda that he committed and that we can hold him accountable to. And I've told folks many times, if a politician can't tell you what they're going to do, if they won't commit to anything, then we can't support them because we can't hold them accountable. Me and Paul don't agree on everything, But what we agree on is that he will listen and he will surround himself with people who will guide him the right direction. Now, that is still confusing because a lot of that is not necessarily consistent with what Wallace has stated up to this point. Like, one of the biggest things that is, and one of the things that, like, Jamal Green has stated continually, that one of his major critiques about Brandon Johnson is that Johnson is sort of, tied by certain of members of the Chicago, upper class, I guess. Basically, he's claiming that, Brandon Johnson is, being tied down by them to the point where he's like, Brandon Johnson campaigned on defund the police, but now he can't even say it. But the problem is, Wallace very much does not want to defund the police and is, in fact, trying to go even further down in the wrong direction in regards to policing. And what happened was, Jamal Green got into a lot of flack because of this endorsement of Wallace. And Jamal Green decided to get a little bit personal, I guess.
They talk about progressivism. The progressives who are the white progressives who are leading the movement for Brandon, they've never came into the neighborhoods on the south and west sides in the first damn place. So you want me to take your advice when you or your candidate or your union have never supported black youth in this city. I'm not scared of you. And I don't give a damn about what people say about me because my record speaks for itself and no one owns me. Paul Vallis ain't got enough money to give me. Paul Vallis, a job ain't enough money in there for me. I got my own everything so I can say and do what I want. And I'm going to tell you the truth. None of these people give a damn about your black children. None of these people give a damn about the fact that these kids are out here carjacking at 12 years old and 13 years old. None of these white people on the north side that's supporting Brandon, not the damn teachers union who is using 80% of their money to be in politics. 80% of all teacher union dues don't go to shit but politics. Look it up. They're literally taking teachers' money to fund his campaign when the teachers don't even got pencils to give their damn kids. You want me to be honest? I'll be honest with you. These young people are in these classrooms, they don't even got damn notebooks. But millions and millions of dollars go through that damn union, and they don't get a dollar to help their damn classroom. Because it's all about power. That's what it's about. That's all it's about. All of this stuff is about power. And who is going to take the power? They fought against Lori Lightfoot for 4 years so they could take the damn power from her because their candidate lost. Tony Preckwinkle was supported by the same damn union that's pumping in Brandon Johnson. And Tony Preckwinkle told Lori Lightfoot 4 fucking years ago that I'm coming for your damn seat and I'm taking control of this city.
So it seems that this is just basically misdirected anger, I guess. Well, not necessarily misdirected anger, but anger that is not being put in the right direction. I get that's misdirection. It's hard for me to explain, but it's rightful anger, but not necessarily in the. Basically, he has legitimate critiques about Brandon Johnson or the Chicago's Teachers Union or whatever, but his solution is in the wrong. For lack of a better term, this is basically like when Cenk Uygur backed Rick Caruso. When he said, "Oh, what Karen Bass is essentially the Democratic status quo candidates." So, I guess the solution is backing this person. But also, I should mention that during the press conference where he said that he was backing Wallace, there was basically a person who asked a question "Were you offered a job in the Wallace campaign?" And then Jamal Green was basically well, I will continue to work with Wallace when he's mayor. And then it's oh yeah, the dude was obvious. he was given a job, he was given a job under the Wallace administration, and I assume, and here's another thing, it's this, something happened during the campaign in the primary. I don't remember the exact thing that happened, but it was Jamal Green said something that was a very obviously not correct way to do this certain issue, and that was and like many people were like, wait, what? And he was like got really mad, and he like yelled at a bunch of people on Twitter for it. But like Vallas wasn't the only one who got a high profile endorsement. There were in fact 3 high profile endorsements for Brandon Johnson. Bernie Sanders, as I mentioned previously, Jesse Jackson formally announced that he was backing Johnson today. And the biggest one, honestly, even though one of them is Bernie, is the fact that Chuy Garcia has backed Brandon Johnson. That's important, really, because Chuy Garcia is essentially like one of the kingmakers of the race. In fact, I might even just flat out say that he is the kingmaker, because 3rd place finisher was Lori Lightfoot, and nobody likes Lori Lightfoot, so she's probably not the kingmaker that people think she is. Although maybe technically she is. She technically is, but she technically isn't. There's really not much else I could say about the Chicago mayoral race. We'll just have to wait and see if maybe Jamal Green has a point or something. So with that out of the way, let's move on to the main topic of this video. Like I said, this episode is going to be very different because of 2 things. One, this organization is technically dissolved. Like, essentially, it's dissolved. We'll get into why essentially in a second. And the second reason we're also not going to get into until later. But the reason why I wanted to talk about this organization was simply because that organization was kind of interesting. Like, it was one of those things, like, this is an organization that I'm pretty sure, like, when it comes into people's subscription fees, are going to be like, this group, I haven't heard of them in forever. And because we know surprisingly a lot, and yet so little about this group, because this group literally just came in and came out almost instantly. It wasn't like a brand new Congress or Justice Democrats or any other, like, major, like, organization, because it didn't have, like, a decent amount of time to, like, go into people's lexicon. This group literally came in and came out almost instantly. So this episode is a lot more like a retrospective rather than like just a off the cuff thing, which is why the notes for this one are a lot more like detailed, I guess, because this is a retrospective, I guess. So let's just get into the group itself. The Rose Caucus is a little hard to describe without comparing it to another group, but to give a brief summary, it was a socialist organization that was formed in January of 2020 by an organizer named Violet Ray that was focused on pushing something called the People's Platform by running candidates all across the United States. They were candidates that were already running that came together under the label, which separated them from other political organizations, which were usually formed before they ran candidates. You know, most groups are top-down, while Rose Caucus was bottom-up. Rose Caucus members were all united under a 3-part pledge. 1. Publicly identify as a democratic socialist, or a further left ideology. 2. Endorse Bernie Sanders for president. 3. Advocate for the People's Platform and join in the ongoing democratic process of developing it further. Now, for those who weren't there, you might be wondering, what the heck is the People's Platform? Well, here is the list of the People's Platform. Trans rights, pre-K through 12 education, student debt, housing rights, a job for everyone, water is life, indigenous rights, disability rights, Black Lives Matter, Green New Deal, eco-socialism, sustainable food, Medicare for all, prescription drug prices, retirement security, women's rights, LGBTQ+ rights, humane drug policy, criminal justice reform, revitalizing unions, gun rights, ending abuse, immigration rights, foreign policy, revitalizing democracy, and political corruption. Now, some of those words you might be a little confused about, particularly that last one, but this is where I have to explain. Those are the 26, pages for their platform. Each of those sections were divided into more specific sections. I think each one had 4 to 5 different aspects, depending on the thing, obviously. Like foreign policy, you'd get the typical anti-imperialism type platform. The political corruption one, I would assume that it would tackle stuff like campaign finance reform. It's hard to get that because the one link that I have that can lead to the platform is sort of a dead link. Now, I don't think all of that was immediately available, but that came available rather quickly. Even though the organization was in its infancy, the organization itself looked really promising for a number of reasons. One, I guess we should address the biggest one, Bernie fever. Like, it was literally big. The biggest one was, of course, Bernie fever. Like, the left was like they were excited because there was like Bernie could legitimately win this one. So they were like, we need a Bernie to have as many allies in the Senate and House as we can get. You saw this all the time. Like, there were like massive candidate lists that were being floated around by tons of different people for the 2020 election. A lot of the candidates that were in Rose Caucus were already pretty prevalent in the online left space. They were already, they were candidates that were already running for their seats, then joined Rose Caucus. There was only like one exception, but that was like under like a technicality to a degree. But we'll get to them in a second. Another reason why this group looked promising was probably due to the fact that it differentiated itself a lot. You know, like I said, it was run bottom up as opposed to top down. So many people were like, this is a bit more like ideologically consistent with left-wing ideologies. Another reason was some of the names that were attached. Not only the candidates, but people who weren't candidates who were affiliating themselves with the group. The most prominent one being Virginia House delegate Lee Carter, a person who became a darling of the online left after his successful run in the 2018 election. Another reason why was sort of tied into the previous reasons, that it was extremely decentralized. Like Justice Dems, brand new Congress, and I guess People for Bernie or Revolution, and I guess to a degree DSA, I guess it depends on how you interpret like DSA membership, were like very affiliated with their candidates. Meanwhile, Rose Caucus was literally like more of a, like again, like they were just it was essentially like a group of podcasters that came together. I know that's like a really shitty comparison, but like that's what I'm saying. It's a difference than like that in a TYT. Like with TYT, you gotta like, you know, you're on the payroll essentially. But meanwhile, if you're like literally just a random group of podcasters that get together to form like a big podcast, there's really no need for a payroll. And it seemed that that was a similar case for Rose Caucus. Like they were essentially like the new like punk rock, I guess. Which also helped by the fact that they weren't really starting their own huge political infrastructure from scratch. Like, unlike MPP, they weren't trying to start a brand new political party. Literally, all of their candidates were just running as Democrats. So even Vote Blue, no matter who lefties, didn't have a particular issue with them. And due to how spread thin they were, they actually were running some candidates in pretty high-profile seats. A lot of which were open, so people were actually thinking, like, maybe these guys could literally be the new Justice Dems. Like, they could get a big win in this cycle that could propel them to the big leagues. They were so excited to remake certain things from past electoral victories. With all this building up with all of everything, what could possibly go wrong? Well, this is where we're going to have to get into the downfall. First, their candidates. Now again, we have to start off with this being worded as a good. For a small org, they were very ambitious with their candidates. Now, I had to go through a lot of lists to find the results, but from what I've gathered, they have publicly backed at least 37 candidates. Also publicly backing Bernie, so unofficially 38 candidates. And the candidate spread was pretty diverse. Senate, House, State Senate, Governor, etc. For context to show how this is, Justice Democrats ran 16 candidates in the same cycle, including their congressional incumbents, and they mostly focused on the national legislative branch. However, there's an unfortunate thing about the Rose Caucus. You see, since they were so spread thin and didn't really have that much of a political infrastructure, if any, their candidates really did not receive that much help from Rose Caucus. Now, you can't necessarily say that's 100% a bad thing, because like they're a decentralized organization. That's kind of a given. But one major critique that I've been seeing nowadays is that a lot of people are like, some of these candidates, they really did not need to back at all. And it's one of the reasons why you see a lot of these like bigger progressive organizations back less and less candidates as they get bigger. Even though you would think that if they get bigger, they should back more candidates. But they realize that they should actually spread their sources like fewer so that they could actually build some electoral victories. Now we'll get into why some of the Rose Caucus's candidates are not necessarily equal. First, we'll start off with the least egregious thing. Not every candidate they ran made it to the finish line. Like Justin Wooten in South Carolina's like Senate seat, Nathan Clay in Colorado's like 7th seat, I think. They didn't even manage to get on the ballot. It's not too much of an issue, but a slight complaint. people would say, maybe you should wait to see if they have the money and viability to drive to get on the ballot first. But then you might say, well, they need to raise awareness to the candidates so they can get on the ballot, which is why I'm not holding this over their head. Like, this is basically like a nitpick. The next one is some people don't necessarily think that certain candidates should have been endorsed. The biggest one that I've seen a lot of people say, like one in particular that I've seen, is that the Rose Caucus backed a candidate by the name of Amber Riddle, who ran in a deep red state Senate seat. And by deep red, I mean her opponent nearly got 80%. So many people say, why would Rose Caucus feel the need to back her candidacy when it was a losing effort from day one? Granted, Riddle actually did make it on the ballots, so that's 1 point in her favor. And even the people who have criticized them for this have stated, like, yes, they do believe that socialists and left-wing candidates should be running a lot more around the country, even if it is just to spread a message. Like, I guess that's really what Amber Riddle was trying to do. She was trying to spread a message. Like, I mean, I got into debates about this before, where some people say that we should run candidates in certain areas, even, like, only to try and, like, break the divide. And then I brought up, like, a scenario very similar to that, like the North Dakota Senate race, where it was, like, one candidate, like, the Republican incumbent got, like, 80% of the vote, and the opponent got like 10% of the vote. And I'm like, should Democrats continue to run candidates in this seat? And they kept saying, like, yes, we should try to, like, bridge the divide. I was like, no, there is no bridging the divide. This is a steeper loss for the Democrats than it was previously. And the next race, they got a very similar margin. Like, there was no bridging the divide, like bridging the gap. And they said, well, I mean, I guess if you don't want to run candidates, I'm not even necessarily saying that. What I was saying is that, like, they were using that to try and, like, poo-poo the idea of third-party candidates running, and I was making the argument that even if you're not going to win, you should at least try to run and try to get your issues out. But let's be real, when a major candidate loses by that much of a margin, it looks, like, sad. But when if a minor candidate got the same amount of votes that she did, I'm pretty sure we'd all be clapping our hands. In fact, very rarely were any of their candidates that well off electorally, because of this particular crowd that Rose Caucus sort of pushed towards. They were running for a crowd of lefties that were too radical for larger left-wing groups like DSA, Justice Dems, etc., but not too radical to be working outside of the Dems entirely, or working with like an extremely far-left organization like the PSL. The one example I can think of is in the Texas Senate race, where they were backing Sima Hernandez. Meanwhile, a lot of the more nationwide progressives were backing Cristina Ramirez. How's her name? Cristina Ramirez? And another example came from the California District 51 race, where a lot more of the nationwide progressives, again, were backing Georgette Gomez. Meanwhile, they were backing Josie Caballero. There was another race, but again, we'll get to that one in a second. Now, I'm not necessarily opposed to the idea or concept of them doing that, especially in certain races like that, because, like, at least in that other one, it was like an incredibly open seat, so it was like, there could have been a major W in that if Josie did win. But I guess I should also say this. Some of the Rose Caucus candidates were just flat out awful. Some for more political reasons, some for more personal reasons. Now, I don't want to, like, equate all of these things together. Like, some of these things are not as egregious as others. Like, for example, Sima Hernandez, she was basically like an asshole. A very wrong, I'm trying to tread lightly here with my language. I've mentioned it before in previous podcasts, and you can still find the tweets, I think, unless she deleted her tweets from that side of the argument. But she said, like, a lot of things that were very much, like, jealousy-based towards DSA and factually incorrect information, and whenever you tried to get her to explain her reasoning, she would very much not, like, give you an actual explanation. Here's the tweets in question here. So here it is. Sima Hernandez says, so the squad has the power to organize a voting bloc to stop or pass legislation, but they tell us common folk that they vote individually for their own districts. What's the point of electing them into the office again? And I think this was about forced vote. And then Sima Hernandez responded this. Like, she quote tweeted it with saying this, reminder, Pelosi named them the squad. I respond, citation, Sima says, look it up for fuck's sake. I respond, Or, don't give me a citation. That definitely proves your point. She responds, do it yourself. I said, you made the claim, you back it up. Unlike you, I have the info right here, because whenever I get into an argument with someone online, I literally always have information right next to me when I'm responding to them, which is why I know she was full of shit. Her simp Scapitelli came to her rescue, and then she never responded to me when I pointed out that she was just objectively wrong. Like, literally, she was just so objectively wrong. Like, she said, like, oh, Nancy Pelosi gave them the name of the squad, and her proof was that Nancy Pelosi called them the squad in the interview, even though that literal interview literally has the interviewer tell Nancy Pelosi, what are your thoughts on this new group of progressive congresswomen called the squad? Because the squad was a term that was created by the grassroots of their supporter base, because they won, and then when they won and went to their congressional meetings, they posted a picture of themselves and just said hashtag squad goals, and then a bunch of progressives who were online just like, yeah, we love the squad. It was a term that came up by the grassroots to describe these 4 progressive congresswomen of color. Now, to get off of that one and move on to a more serious one, this is probably the biggest legitimate issue for them, was the situation regarding around Brandon Hood, who had a case of, quote, sexual aggression levied towards him. TLDR, he touched his campaign manager's arm, shoulders, and back too much. While it technically does not classify as harassment and assault according to his state's law, you can clearly see the intent that he was trying to push. He also received allegations of other types of bad behavior, which levied towards this touching made people probably a lot uncomfortable. Now, granted, Rose Caucus did not stand by him. As soon as these were called out, they basically were just nope, and they just pulled the plug on his campaign. He still ran, obviously, but they did not continue to back him moving forward, and in fact used this time to say that other political organizations should take them up on this sort of mentality, and in the future, they should, point blank, just decide that they're going to, do this forward. Every other organization should do that. And I agree, to an extent, obviously. Maybe the organization could look into it, but of course, Rose Caucus is, again, it was a smaller organization that doesn't have the resources to do a full-scale investigation in Brandon Hood. Plus, the, quote, investigation could literally just be, oh, we just sat down and did nothing, and lo and behold, we did nothing wrong. Another progressive organization in another country, Morena, did a similar thing when one of their candidates was accused of sexual assault. And sadly, that they didn't really end up doing much in actually try and stop the issues until it was way too late, and their reputation in that area was kind of ruined. Now, a couple other Rose Caucus candidates have also gotten a little bit cringe, but much like Seema, they did it after the election. But unlike Seema, these isn't really personal things. These are more actual ideological things. The biggest one I can think of, Barrington Martin II. Martin II is literally just a Republican now. Not even I'm a Bull Moose Neo Roosevelt Republican or some bull crap like that. No. He's literally just a Republican now. No ifs, ands, or buts about being a Republican. And that was one of my biggest confusions when I was first saw that. I was I knew Barrington was sort of this weird guy. I was confused as to why Rose Caucus backed him, because I knew for a fact that Barrington was a Yang Gang type guy. So I was why is Rose Caucus backing him? As a Yang Ganger, I would assume that he's pro-capitalist, and by those parameters, he does not qualify socialist or further than that. But it turns out Barrington just flat out lied and just pretended that he was in line with the group's ideology just to get support for his candidacy. And one of the biggest things that he has gone full far-right person on is in regards to BLM and trans people, which I should remind you, again, position number 1 that I read on the People's Platform, trans rights, and position number 9, Black Lives Matter. Now, Barrington does not believe either of those anymore, apparently. Now, that was the biggest one, the biggest shift The next one is like a slightly more reasonable, quote unquote, but it's in a very similar vein. Jason Kishinev is essentially a closet rightist, like Jimmy Dore or Jackson Hinkle. And he may have made, let's just say, very odd claims giving his own alleged heritage. Like how he basically parroted the Jewish Bolshevik conspiracy theory, and that an incumbent senator by the name of Richard Blumenthal, a Jewish senator, might add, is a dual citizen of Israel. Both are, let's just say, very anti-Semitic statements. Again, very odd for him to state because he allegedly is Jewish, but I mean, he could be lying. Allegedly, and I should also say, I didn't say that. I'm not the one who said that he could have lied about his heritage. Someone else said that. I'm just saying what they said. But the one candidate that I'm pretty sure you've all been sitting down here waiting for me to talk about, the one candidate that is so controversial and so ingrained in the Rose Caucus mentality that they need a full section dedicated to themselves. Joshua Collins. The Cavernacle already made a video about his rise and fall, but like I said, I can't talk about Rose Caucus without going in depth about his candidacy, much like how you can't talk about the history of Justice Democrats without talking about AOC. For lack of a comparison, he was slated to be their AOC. And depending on your views on AOC or just how you view AOC and Justice Dem's relationship, he kind of is. So let's just get into Joshua Collins. Joshua Collins was a truck driver who decided to run for Washington District 10's congressional seat in 2020. As a sort of extension of AOC's internet to congressional fame, he mostly focuses campaigning on the internet, particularly through TikTok, being very much in the dirtbag left style, eat the rich, hang bush, shit like that. And he steadily became very popular online, even more so when his opponent, Danny Heck, announced that they were retiring. Collins made the claim that he was the reason that Heck retired, a thing that basically the entire online left parroted every day since, including me, which made me dumbfounded when I looked into the actual reason why Danny Heck retired and realized that Joshua Collins just flat out lied to everybody. You see, Danny Heck retired because of the impeachment trial. You see, he was talking about the impeachment trial and wrote an article explaining how the impeachment trial showed how partisanship in the politics of our era has gotten so strict that Republicans were looking at a blatantly guilty man and saying that he was not guilty and he did nothing wrong. Joshua Collins took that section, partisanships, radical partisanship in our politics, and then took that and spun it as he saw how I was this radical socialist and he was scared and ran away. And the online left just ate it up because, again, Bernie fever. Everybody was just so excited for the Bernie 2020 campaign. They would have believed any left-wing related story that you would have fed them. This was the last leg of unity on the left. We were so happy. Everybody was united, sort of, and everybody was so happy. The cracks were there, but the cracks were not big enough to explode. And even if that weren't true, the online left was going to put energy into making sure that that would be true, trying to make Collins, again, the next AOC, and he became an incredibly hot topic, again, with the online left. But with this newfound rise came newfound scrutiny, and some started realizing that Collins really spent most of his time campaigning online, and that is bad, considering the people he campaigned to were literally an echo chamber. So yes, of course he would be very popular in his circle, but he had no reach outside of that. And sometimes he started drawing new lines that would give divisions within his own circle. He was talking about the idea of floating the idea of possibly running as an independent or a minor party candidate, when up to that point, he was pushing himself to be a Democratic candidate for that seat. Now, I should mention, Washington's electoral system goes like this. You don't need any sort of actual party to run with. You can print anything on your ballot line and they won't question it. I'd assume maybe the only rules might be like profanity related, or maybe like you can't trick people. For example, like I don't think you can run as like if you're running as a Democrat, you can't run as like a Democrat, and then like you can't run as, if you're saying I'm running as the Democratic candidate, you can't have another person run as a Democrat candidate. Like you have to either both be running as a Democrat, like the same label, or one has to run as something different. But again, I could be wrong. Back to Collins, it was made even worse when people would invite him to interviews, and one of the things that they would do would be like, hey, what is your biggest policy that you support? And he would immediately turn to just reading his platform on his website word for word. But then when they'd say, okay, yeah, but like, give me an in-depth reason why you should support that policy, he really couldn't do anything, which led to a conspiracy theory that floated around AOC for a bit, that Joshua Collins was essentially an empty tool for whoever was leading the Rose Caucus to essentially run vicariously through. Again, like AOC suffered the same allegations, like how could this random bar person become like this big left-wing voice? She was clearly puppeted around by Cenk Uygur, but that was worst case scenario. Best case scenario, it was basically just he was just some unqualified guy who didn't know what he was doing, which also isn't a good look. Then there came questions about how Joshua Collins was spending his money. One particular thing that caught people's eyes was a $374.49 eBay purchase of a tablet keyboard for his campaign manager / head of Rose Caucus, Violet Ray, with being spread around like, oh, he spent his money on a gaming PC. Like, even though, like, it was supposed to be just like an official one because, like, oh, their like keyboard broke, so they had to buy a new one. Spun around to be a leisure purchase as opposed to like actually like needed for the campaign. And things all came to a head on May 13th of 2020 when Joshua Collins deactivated his Twitter account. Now, reportedly, Joshua Collins had done this a couple of times during the campaign because he would get a ton of notifications and it would be like, it's a little too much for me to bear. So he would just like deactivate his account in case he needed like a mental health break. Which at first you might say, well, that's not necessarily too bad. But the biggest issue with that was he deactivated his account literally 2 days before the filing deadline. And many people were like asking him prior to that point, like, when are you officially filing? Like, are you officially going to file like soon? And he's like, I'm gonna wait till the actual filing deadline. But then he deactivates his account like literally right before the filing deadline. So everybody immediately went, wait, are you like people legitimately were like, oh, so Joshua Collins just ran away with the money. And unfortunately, for some reason, Collins himself would not even acknowledge anything. Like, his staff was basically put on, like damage control. Explaining, like, no, he's done this before, it's fine. Like, he's just taking a break. But by that point, it was essentially too late. Like, even when Collins came back, a lot of people basically were thinking that he just came back just so that they wouldn't come after him. Not helped by the fact that a lot of people who donated to him basically felt the exact same way as if he did run away with the money, because when he filed, he decided to file under the Essential Workers Party as opposed to running under a Democrat, and any other support that he had left essentially evaporated, getting a measly 1.2%. Now, I should mention that this is the race I was actually talking about previously. There was another candidate that was quote-unquote left in the race, Beth Adoglio, but Rose Caucus backed Joshua Collins. But that was different because Joshua Collins was very intrinsically linked to Rose Caucus. He wasn't like a founder. He wasn't like working behind the scenes. He was essentially a candidate, but he was a active candidate, I guess. Like I said, he was considered their AOC, for better and for worse, I guess. Now, another aspect to the fall of Rose Caucus comes from their almost consistent rivalry with DSA, or as they would sometimes say, D*A. My own personal experiences would be seeing the Rose Caucus account retweeting their founder attacking DSA for vague claims of harassment, And this is where I decided to make this episode vastly different from the rest. You see, unlike all the other organizations that I talked about on the show, or will talk about on the show, since Rose Caucus is so freaking small, and their support is, and their like activity was essentially completely online for the most part, or at least they were more like vocally available online, I guess, I actually managed to get in contact with Violet Ray to ask them about Rose Caucus. Especially this part. Like, this is the part that I was the most curious about. The first thing I asked about was Brandon Hood, because I didn't want to just say on this episode, oh, by the way, a Rose Caucus candidate was accused of sexual harassment, and then just, like, have that be completely wrong. But this is an area where I was actually curious about as well, because as I mentioned before, what I saw was Violet and the Rose Caucus account attacking DSA seemingly out of nowhere. And it just really seemed like, again, like it seemed similar to Seema Hernandez or like Paula Jean Swearingen when they attacked like AOC Squad, DSA or whatever. It seemed to come out of pure jealousy, or that they were making up arguments that didn't exist. So I just point blank asked Violet, what the heck happened? Why all the DSA hate? And then they regaled me the story, and from the most unbiased and truthful point of view, here's what it seems to happen. Lee Carter, DSA elected member of the Virginia General Assembly, got into a controversy with his local DSA affiliate when his ex-wife claimed that he was abusive to her, which led to the relationship between him and DSA to sever. Violet, being Lee's partner at the time, went to his defense, and then used this time to loudly call out disagreements with the DSA, such as DSA's anti-communist bylaws. Now, for the record, I mentioned this in my DSA video. I did mention that DSA has had a history of, like, othering other, like, further left tendencies, but I never really explicitly mentioned, like, their anti-communist bylaws, mostly because I didn't really know they existed. I knew that I thought it was more of like an unofficial rule and not like an official rule. And when I say that, you'll see why I mean that in a second, because it technically is sort of an unofficial rule. But I'll read what they mean when Violet means their anti-communist bylaws. They're referring to Bylaws Article 1, Section 3. Members can be expelled if they are found to be in substantial disagreement with the principles or policies of the organization, or if they consistently engage in undemocratic, disruptive behavior, or if they are under the discipline of any self-defined democratic centralist organization. Democratic centralism is a practice mostly used in communist organizations that, TLDR, if a thing in the organization is passed by a large margin, they must all support it, no questions asked. Now, some people have claimed that this is an old thing of a bygone era, the Cold War, and that DSA should look into flat out removing that law, but DSA's argument is that they don't really enforce that law, but Violet made the claim that some of their friends were kicked out of DSA due to this bylaw. And again, from the outset, it looks like V just blew up on DSA for no reason. So a ton of DSAers came to DSA's defense. And they brought up a lot of the same stuff I mentioned previously about Rose Caucus, and even made up this claim about like how Rose Caucus is a ripoff of DSA because they use similar symbology, the rose. More tensions rose because apparently DSA stole a couple of candidates from them. The two ones that I got excited to me were Lauren Ashcraft, but a larger one seems to be Karishma Mehta. They were really involved in Karishma's campaign initially, but then, apparently, in order to get the endorsement of the local DSA chapter, Karishma had to cut ties with the Rose Caucus due to their affiliation with Lee Carter. And the person that was blamed was an individual by the name of Irene Koo, who was apparently a member or affiliate with the Center of American Progress at the time that they were affiliated with DSA. Now, I guess the finale of the Rose Caucus was the last major candidate that had any affiliation with them was, of course, Lee Carter when he ran his Hail Mary gubernatorial run. They did unofficially back Princess Blanding in the general election, but nothing really came of it. Aside from like a tweet or two where like Lee said, hey, I support Princess. And I'm pretty sure the official Rose Caucus account said like, we'll be officially adding Princess Blanding to the site soon, but they never ended up doing it. And after that, Rose Caucus essentially just faded away. So I guess that's the history of the Rose Caucus. Now that we got all that information out of the way, let's answer and try to streamline certain questions. First, did Rose Caucus rip off DSA? I mean, you can clearly tell that Rose Caucus attempted to push some similarities. One I recall was that they offered a flag, which was a dark red flag with their symbol, and the symbol was, instead of being like their normal symbol, it was like a painted symbol of like a white colors with a rose in the middle. Like, it was definitely meant to be similar to the DSA flag, so you could definitely make the argument that they do have some similarities. Though, of course, you can also say there really is not that many ways you could put a rose on a flag without it being just a ripoff. Yeah, it could have been a coincidence, but then again, due to their, like, constant divide, I could clearly see maybe that they were doing this to spite them. And I should also say this, like, them using a rose as their symbol doesn't automatically mean they're a ripoff. The rose is a long-standing political symbol for socialism and social democracy and that kind of, like, stuff. Basically any form of, like left-wing activity. But the thing is, like, it doesn't even really matter if they did rip off DSA's, like, symbology or whatever. It doesn't really matter, really. I don't really care that much as long as the organizations, like, don't directly claim, like, oh, like, if Rose Caucus made an email saying, like, we are the DSA affiliate of X nation or whatever, then it'd be like, okay, that's bad. But they never claim that at all. The second question is one that I know that if V watches this video, they're going to vehemently disagree with me on. Was the group terminally online? I would say kind of. They would say no. The reason why they would say no is because they said, like, they actually pushed for a lot of IRL organization. Now, that's fair, and that is true. But I would argue that when I say that the organization was terminally online, I mean that they let a lot of petty online drama push how the organization branded itself and how they argued points. Though I guess technically lefties arguing against each other and making like really bad points is not really a thing that's exclusive to the internet. That's the thing that's basically intrinsic to leftism, apparently. The last question, is Rose Caucus a grift? Absolutely not. Like, there is no way you could actually look at Rose Caucus and claim that they were a grift. It seems that the biggest fault of Rose Caucus was that they were people who didn't know what they were doing, who were too ambitious. They're basically like the person who has just turned 25 who decides to run for House. They are looking at themselves and thinking, I want to do this big thing, and I want to outdo the people before me. For like personal reasons, maybe a little bit, but they do genuinely believe like they're trying to do good, and like maybe Rose Caucus let the personal drama get a little bit ahead of them at the later points of their lifespan, but at the very least they started out seemingly trying to do it for legitimately good reasons. And I say we can't necessarily fault the people for pushing for an organization to do good. Like, we can't really fault them for that. Now, this actually begs one last question. What is next? If you at one point followed the Rose Caucus Twitter account and then never unfollowed them, you may notice that if you go into your followers feed, that there is an account there called the Petal Institute, and their symbol is eerily similar to the Rose Caucus symbol. Obviously, it's an attempt to rebrand and refocus for the future, and that was one of the things that I asked V when I DM'd them. I said, what is the Petal Institute? And the Petal Institute, or the People's Educational Training, Access, and Learning Institute, is supposed to be ultimately a thing like a leftist-based homeschool curriculum to support disabled and disadvantaged kids, and maybe also make new political theory to attack ableism on the left. But as of right now, there is no intentions of doing the Petal Institute immediately. Like, there is no intention for that whatsoever. because the last time V tried to do something, it didn't turn out so well. So V's essentially just giving themselves time to breathe, and then they'll look into like making the Pedal Institute into a thing. Much like Rose Caucus, I'm not necessarily against the concept and the ideas of what they want to do. And hopefully things don't like turn out as bad as Rose Caucus did. Maybe in the future, V is gonna have their face next to like all the other like Marxist thinkers. Just a thought. So anyways, that's pretty much all I gotta say on Rose Caucus. So hopefully if you are a person who like was somewhat curious about what the heck happened to Rose Caucus, hopefully I answered some questions and gave you some history that you'd like to know. Thanks for watching this video. Be sure to like, comment, share, subscribe, and click the bell to be notified when a future video of mine comes out. And for some more content from me, you can go to our website, follow me on Twitter, join my Discord, or consider supporting me on Patreon.